When the man in the black ponytail walked into Hollywood in 1988, he didn't audition. He didn't beg. Studios fought over him like he was the second coming of Bruce Lee. Within 3 years, Steven Seagal became the biggest action star on the planet, making more money per film than Stallone or Schwarzenegger. Then something happened that nobody saw coming. The same industry that built him spent the next 2 decades systematically destroying everything he'd created. And the reasons why will make you question everything Hollywood tells you about who deserves to be a star. The Mythbuilder, April 10th, 1952. A baby named Steven Frederick Seagal entered the world in Lansing, Michigan. His father was a high school math teacher. His mother worked as a medical technician. They were Jewish, middle class, and about as far from martial arts mystique as you could get. But that origin story didn't fit the legend Seagal would spend decades building, so he rewrote it. According to Seagal, he grew up in Brooklyn, not Michigan, trained with the best martial artists in the world from childhood, spoke fluent Japanese before he hit puberty, worked for the CIA on classified missions nobody could discuss. Every interview added new layers to the mythology. He claimed he'd been a martial arts instructor for the military's most elite units, said he'd worked as a bodyguard for dignitaries whose names he couldn't reveal, told stories about fighting multiple attackers and back-alley brawls that somehow never made police reports. And for years, nobody questioned any of it because the man moved like something supernatural. The truth was messier, but still impressive. Seagal did start martial arts training young. Around age 7, his family moved to Fullerton, California when he was 5, not Brooklyn. He studied karate under various instructors and showed genuine talent. The kid had natural coordination, the kind of body awareness that can't be taught. At 17, he made a bold decision that would define his life. He moved to Japan to study Aikido, a defensive martial art focused on redirecting an opponent's energy. This part was real. Seagal spent over a decade in Japan, married a Japanese woman named Miyako Fujitani, whose family operated a dojo in Osaka, opened his own Aikido school, and became one of the first Westerners to operate a dojo in Japan. His skills were legitimate. Aikido practitioners who trained with him confirmed he had mastery. He earned his black belt, learned the language, absorbed the culture. For a young American in the 1970s, that took serious commitment. But Seagal couldn't just be good, he had to be mythical. He claimed to have trained with masters who'd never heard of him, said he'd done covert work for the government that left no paper trail, told journalists he'd fought in real combat situations he couldn't detail because they were classified. The stories grew bigger with each telling, more elaborate, and more impossible to verify. By the early 1980s, Seagal was back in the United States, teaching Aikido to students in Los Angeles. His timing was perfect. The martial arts boom was exploding. Karate Kid was about to hit theaters. Americans were obsessed with Eastern philosophy and discipline. His dojo attracted celebrities and wealthy clients who loved the exotic mystique of this ponytailed sensei who spoke in Zen koans and moved with impossible fluidity. He wasn't just teaching self-defense. He was selling enlightenment wrapped in violence. He'd demonstrate techniques on students with theatrical flair, snapping wrists and dropping bodies while explaining the spiritual principles behind each movement. And Hollywood was watching. One student changed everything. Michael Ovitz, the most powerful agent in Hollywood history, the man who built Creative Artists Agency into an empire, the guy who represented everyone from Tom Cruise to Martin Scorsese, started training with Seagal. Ovitz was fascinating. Here was someone who could actually fight, who had genuine martial arts credentials from Japan, but also had the look and charisma to carry a film. The ponytail, the exotic background, the quiet intensity. Ovitz saw dollar signs. More importantly, he saw a way to revolutionize action cinema. Every action star was doing karate kicks or boxing. Nobody was doing Aikido. Nobody looked like Seagal. Nobody had his specific combination of legitimate skill and manufactured mystery. Ovitz didn't just see a client. He saw a franchise waiting to happen. Hollywood's Aikido Messiah. 1988. Above the Law hit theaters with a marketing campaign built entirely around one question. Who is Steven Seagal? Nobody had seen Aikido on screen before. The flowing, almost dance-like movements where Seagal redirected attackers' energy and snapped their joints looked completely different from the flashy kicks of karate films or the brutal slugfests of boxing movies. There was something hypnotic about watching him move. No wasted motion, no telegraphing, just instant violence that ended before opponents understood what had happened. Audiences were mesmerized. The film made $40 million on an $8 million budget. For a debut, that was extraordinary. Studios were already calculating sequel potential before opening weekend finished. But the numbers told only part of the story. Seagal had done something unprecedented. He'd negotiated complete creative control from the start. Michael Ovitz had wielded his power like a weapon, forcing Warner Brothers to give this unknown actor privileges that established stars couldn't get. Seagal co-wrote the script with director Andrew Davis. He directed some scenes himself when he disagreed with Davis's vision. He designed every fight sequence down to the last joint lock, and he absolutely refused to take a single hit on camera. His character couldn't show weakness, couldn't bleed unless it made him look tougher, couldn't lose any fight ever. This wasn't negotiable. Hard to Kill arrived in 1990 and made $47 million. Marked for Death that same year pulled in $57 million. The formula was printing money. These weren't just successful action films. They were cultural moments. Seagal's signature move, the snap break where he twists someone's arm and you'd hear bones crack through theater speakers, became iconic. Kids were imitating it on playgrounds. His monotone delivery of one-liners, his complete lack of emotional range, somehow worked. He played the same character in every film, a former CIA or Special Forces operative pulled back into action, always morally right, always physically invincible, always ending fights in seconds. Critics complained about the repetition. Audiences didn't care. They wanted more of exactly the same thing. Out for Justice in 1991 solidified his superstar status. The film opened #1 at the box office, crushing everything in its path. Seagal was now commanding $10 million per picture, putting him alongside Schwarzenegger and Stallone in the elite tier of action stars. More impressively, his films cost a fraction of theirs. Schwarzenegger needed massive budgets for elaborate sets and special effects. Seagal just needed cameras and stunt performers willing to take brutal-looking falls. The profit margins were obscene. Under Siege, released in 1992, became his masterpiece. $100 million worldwide. Critics actually praised it. Roger Ebert gave it 3 stars. Variety called it the best action film of the year. The movie worked because director Andrew Davis reined in Seagal's worst impulses and surrounded him with legitimate actors like Tommy Lee Jones and Gary Busey, who elevated every scene they touched. The script was tight. The action was coherent. Seagal's character was an actual person instead of a walking mythology. For one brief moment, it seemed like Seagal might evolve into a real actor. At this moment, Steven Seagal stood at the absolute peak. Warner Brothers signed him to a multi-picture deal worth over $50 million. He was the most bankable action star in Hollywood. Toy companies made action figures. Video game developers competed to license his likeness. Magazine covers called him the next big thing. Entertainment Weekly ran a feature asking if he'd surpass Schwarzenegger. Investors were throwing money at anything with his name attached. He'd gone from teaching Aikido in a strip mall dojo to commanding the same box office respect as established legends, the American dream on steroids. And then the mask started slipping. Cracks in the armor. Here's what they didn't tell you about working with Steven Seagal. On the set of every single film, terror and confusion ruled, not because of dangerous stunts or complicated sequences, but because Seagal's ego had metastasized into something directors couldn't control. Production assistants learned to avoid eye contact. Crew members developed elaborate systems to warn each other when Seagal was approaching. The atmosphere on his films wasn't creative collaboration. It was survival. During Out for Justice, crew members watched in disbelief as Seagal insisted on rewriting scenes on the spot. He'd show up to set without having read the day's pages, then demand changes that made no narrative sense. If a script required his character to struggle even slightly, Seagal changed it. If another actor's role got too big or their dialogue too clever, Seagal demanded cuts. He'd arrive hours late, sometimes after lunch, blame production for poor scheduling, then demand everyone work overtime to make up for his delays. The crew would be standing around burning daylight and budget while Seagal sat in his trailer, doing whatever he did in there. When he finally emerged, he'd act like the delay was everyone else's fault. Directors learned quickly: either let Seagal do whatever he wanted, or prepare for warfare that would destroy the production schedule and maybe your career. The stunt double situation became legendary for all the wrong reasons. Seagal insisted he performed all his own stunts. Interviews featured him describing the danger, the broken bones he'd suffered, the commitment to authenticity that separated him from other action stars who relied on Hollywood tricks. He'd talk about taking real hits, doing real throws, putting his body on the line for the art. Meanwhile, stunt coordinators were pulling their hair out. Seagal used doubles constantly, including for basic fight choreography that any competent martial artist should handle. Wide shots where you couldn't see his face clearly, that's a double. Complex sequences with multiple opponents, doubles doing most of the work. Even some of the simple Aikido techniques, the ones Seagal supposedly mastered in Japan, were often performed by stunt professionals who then had to match his movements in close-ups. The problem wasn't using doubles. Every action star used them. Schwarzenegger had doubles. Stallone had doubles. That's how the industry worked. The problem was the line. Stunt performers watched Seagal take credit for their work, claim injuries they had suffered, and build his tough guy reputation on their broken bones and precision choreography. It was disrespectful on a level that violated the unwritten code of action filmmaking. Then came the incidents nobody could ignore. Actress Jenny McCarthy went on multiple talk shows, describing an audition where Seagal repeatedly emphasized that she had to take off her clothes for the role, making her uncomfortable enough to walk out. She described the entire setup as predatory, designed to make young actresses feel like they had no choice. Other actresses came forward with similar stories. Private auditions in hotel rooms, demands for nudity that weren't in the script, inappropriate touching disguised as demonstrating fight choreography. The whispers around Hollywood described a pattern of behavior that powerful agents and studios actively covered up because Seagal was printing money. John Leguizamo, during the filming of Executive Decision in 1996, made the mistake of laughing during rehearsal. Something about the scene struck him as funny. It was an innocent moment. Seagal took it as disrespect. He confronted Leguizamo, got in his face, tried to intimidate him with that 1,000-yard stare that worked in movies. When Leguizamo didn't back down, when he refused to be bullied by someone playing tough guy, Seagal allegedly body slammed him into a wall. Cast and crew separated them before it escalated into a full brawl. Leguizamo later described the incident publicly on talk shows, laughing about it, calling Seagal insecure and ridiculous. But during filming, everyone stayed quiet. That's how Hollywood worked. Seagal was making too much money for studios to care about his behavior. The martial arts community started speaking up too. Steven's former students and fellow Aikido practitioners began contradicting his stories. The CIA work never happened. No records, no confirmation, nothing. The covert missions were fiction. The underground fights in Japan that he claimed to have won, nobody could verify any of them. Japanese martial artists who'd been in the scene during Seagal's time there said they'd never heard of him fighting competitively. Gene LaBelle, a legendary stuntman and martial artist who'd worked on Seagal's films, started telling a story that would haunt Seagal forever. The Unraveling. 1991. Saturday Night Live decided to do something unprecedented. They aired a sketch mocking Steven Seagal so brutally that it became legendary. The premise was simple. Seagal played a martial arts instructor who couldn't actually fight, relying on camera tricks and intimidation. It was savage, specific, and clearly based on industry gossip. Seagal reportedly called NBC executives demanding they never air it again. The sketch became one of SNL's most requested clips. But that sketch connected to something darker. Gene LaBelle had been spreading a story around Hollywood for months. According to LaBelle, during the filming of Out for Justice, Seagal was talking tough about fighting anyone on set. LaBelle, a genuine legend with credentials in judo, jiu-jitsu, and professional wrestling, challenged him. Not seriously, just playful. Seagal allegedly said he couldn't be choked out, so LaBelle put him in a rear naked choke. And according to LaBelle and multiple witnesses, Seagal went limp and defecated on himself. Seagal denied everything, called LaBelle a liar, threatened lawsuits. But the story spread through Hollywood like wildfire. Stunt performers who'd worked with Seagal started confirming pieces of it. Crew members remembered the incident differently, but agreed something humiliating had happened. Whether the full story was true or not almost didn't matter. The myth of Steven Seagal's invincibility had cracked. The real destruction began in 1994 when his personal assistant, Katherine Heigl's aunt, left his employment and started making noise about inappropriate behavior. 2 years later, former model Cassandra Harris filed a lawsuit, alleging Seagal had sexually harassed her during a supposed casting session. The lawsuit detailed predatory behavior, intimidation tactics, and a pattern that suggested this wasn't isolated. Hollywood studios faced a choice: stand by their profitable star, or cut ties before the damage spread. They chose profit, but with conditions. Seagal's budgets got slashed, his creative control disappeared. Warner Brothers quietly let his contract expire. By 1997, On Deadly Ground had bombed both critically and commercially. Seagal had directed it himself, used the film to preach environmental messages, and produced something so self-indulgent that even his core fans walked away. Fire Down Below, in 1997, earned just $16 million domestically against a $20 million budget. The Patriot in 1998 went straight to video in most markets. That's when everything changed. Seagal, who'd been commanding $10 million per film just 5 years earlier, was now making direct-to-video action films for a fraction of that. The descent was breathtaking in its speed. But here's what nobody wants to admit. The film's getting worse wasn't just about smaller budgets. Seagal's physical condition had deteriorated. The lean, fast martial artist from Above the Law had been replaced by someone visibly heavier, moving slower, relying more on camera tricks. Rumors spread that Seagal had health issues, but he never confirmed anything. Instead, he insisted on wearing looser clothing, filmed from more flattering angles, and used stunt doubles for increasingly basic movements. More lawsuits followed. In 2010, Caden Nguyen, hired as Seagal's assistant, filed a lawsuit alleging he'd treated her like a sex slave, subjected her to constant harassment, and created a work environment so hostile she had to escape. The details were graphic and disturbing. Seagal denied everything, called it extortion, but the pattern was undeniable. Multiple women across 2 decades telling similar stories. Exile and reinvention. By 2005, Steven Seagal had made a decision. If America wouldn't worship him anymore, he'd find somewhere that would. He started spending increasing amounts of time in Russia, not quietly either. Seagal began publicly praising Vladimir Putin, calling him a great leader, attending events as Putin's guest. The photos were surreal. A washed-up American action star sitting next to one of the world's most powerful autocrats, both of them smiling like old friends. In 2016, Putin granted him Russian citizenship in a ceremony that made international news. Seagal stood on stage, hand over heart, pledging allegiance to a country that most Americans viewed with suspicion. The relationship seemed bizarre to outsiders. Why would Putin care about a washed-up American action star whose last theatrical release had tanked over a decade earlier? But Seagal provided something valuable, a bridge to American culture, a celebrity willing to publicly support Russia's political positions without hesitation. Seagal started doing propaganda work, whether he understood it or not. He'd appear on Russian television praising Putin's leadership, criticizing American foreign policy as corrupt and hypocritical, positioning himself as a truth-teller rejected by Hollywood for being too real, too dangerous, too unwilling to play their game. Russian state media ate it up. They'd found their useful American. Meanwhile, the direct-to-video machine kept churning. From 2000 to 2020, Seagal made over 30 films almost nobody watched. The quality was staggering in its awfulness. These weren't just bad action movies, they were barely movies at all. Seagal often appeared only in a handful of scenes, clearly filmed in just a few days, then edited into movies where body doubles handled everything else. He'd sit at tables while other characters explained the plot. He'd stand still delivering exposition. Occasionally, he'd throw one or two Aikido techniques, usually against opponents who fell before he touched them, and collect his paycheck. His weight had ballooned, the ponytail was thinning, the black clothing couldn't hide what decades of ego and neglect had done to his body. Fans who remembered the lean, dangerous fighter from above the law couldn't reconcile that memory with what appeared on screen. Then in 2009, Seagal got appointed as a reserve deputy chief in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. The publicity stunt was meant to boost his tough guy image. Look, he's a real lawman now, not just a movie star playing pretend. Instead, it led to disaster. In 2011, Seagal participated in a raid on a suspected cockfighting operation. His film crew was there to capture footage for his reality show, Steven Seagal, Lawman. During the raid, authorities drove a tank, an actual tank, into the suspect's home, killing dozens of chickens and a puppy. The homeowner, Yiza Sanchez Liovera, sued. The lawsuit detailed Seagal's reckless showboating and the department's negligence. It painted a picture of law enforcement treating a serious operation like a Hollywood production, all so Seagal could look tough on camera. Steven Seagal. Lawman was supposed to rehabilitate his image, show America that he was the real deal, a legitimate warrior serving his community. It did the opposite. Episodes showed Seagal pretending to be a real cop, riding along on patrols but exaggerating his role in arrests, playing up danger that didn't exist. He'd arrive at scenes after other officers had already secured suspects, then position himself for dramatic camera angles. Actual law enforcement professionals were embarrassed. They watched a reality show turn their profession into a joke. The show lasted 3 seasons, each one more ridiculous than the last, and became a punchline. Late-night comedians made Seagal jokes. The internet turned him into a meme. The man who'd once been Hollywood's most bankable action star was now a cautionary tale about ego and delusion. The final verdict today, at 72 years old, Steven Seagal lives primarily in Moscow, occasionally releasing direct-to-video films that make his 2000-era work look like masterpieces. He's been banned from entering Ukraine. The FBI investigated his business relationships with Russian officials. His name appears as a cautionary tale, not a success story. When entertainment journalists need an example of how badly a career can implode, they invoke Seagal. When martial artists want to warn students about the dangers of ego, they tell his story. The man who once commanded $10 million per film now scrapes together budgets filming in Eastern Europe. His scenes shot separately from the rest of the cast because nobody wants to work with him. So what really happened? How did Hollywood's biggest action star become an industry outcast? The easy answer is ego. Seagal believed his own mythology, treated people horribly, and faced consequences. But that's incomplete. Plenty of stars have massive egos and abusive behavior. They're still working. Tom Cruise has legendarily difficult demands and Scientology baggage. He's still making blockbusters. Christian Bale had an on-set meltdown that went viral. His career barely hiccuped. Mel Gibson said things that should have ended him permanently. He's directing Oscar-nominated films. Hollywood forgives almost anything if you're making money or still have something they need. The deeper truth is that Seagal represented everything wrong with how Hollywood creates stars. The industry built him on lies, covered up his behavior while he was profitable, then abandoned him the moment he stopped making money. Michael Ovitz weaponized his power to force studios into giving an unknown Aikido instructor creative control and star treatment. Warner Brothers marketed him as some mysterious warrior with a secret past. Entertainment media repeated his claims without verification. They enabled the monster, fed the ego, then acted shocked when it consumed everything. When the lawsuits started piling up and the box office started declining, those same enablers suddenly discovered morality. Studios that had looked the other way for years, when actresses complained about his behavior, suddenly cared deeply about workplace conduct. Agents who'd laughed at his exaggerations suddenly worried about his credibility. The system didn't reject Seagal because he was abusive. It rejected him because he stopped being profitable. But Seagal also destroyed himself. He couldn't evolve. When audiences wanted depth, he gave them the same monotone tough guy. When the industry demanded accountability, he fled to Russia. When former collaborators spoke up about mistreatment, he denied and attacked. Every choice reinforced his isolation. He could have apologized for the Jean LaBelle incident, turned it into a self-deprecating joke. shown some humility. Instead, he denied it happened and threatened lawsuits. He could have settled the harassment allegations quietly, issued a vague apology, and moved on like countless other stars have done. Instead, he fought every accusation, called every accuser a liar, burned every possible bridge. He could have accepted smaller roles in ensemble films, played villains, shown range. Instead, he demanded star billing and refused any part that didn't position him as invincible. The saddest part? Seagal actually had legitimate martial arts skills that could have sustained a long career if he'd stayed humble. Look at Chuck Norris, who built a decades-long career by being professional and adaptable. Norris did Walker, Texas Ranger, for 8 years without drama. He showed up on time. He treated crews with respect. He didn't demand that his character win every fight or look perfect in every scene. When his film career declined, he pivoted to television without ego. When that ended, he became a spokesperson, an internet meme. He's beloved because he never took himself too seriously. Or consider Jean-Claude Van Damme, who survived his own career collapse by acknowledging mistakes and showing humanity. Van Damme admitted to drug addiction. He apologized for on-set behavior. He did self-deprecating roles in films like JCVD that made fun of his image. He rebuilt slowly, and now has a late career resurgence built on genuine respect. Seagal could have been a respected elder statesman of action cinema, training the next generation, making cameos in bigger films, being celebrated at conventions. Instead, he's a punchline living in exile. Steven Seagal's story isn't about Hollywood's cruelty. It's about what happens when talent, ego, and enabling collide. The industry gave him everything. They manufactured his mystique. They promoted his lies. They covered up his behavior. He demanded more. And when they finally said no, he burned every bridge on his way out. That's not injustice. That's consequence. The tragedy is that somewhere under all the lies and ego was a genuinely skilled martial artist who could have made meaningful contributions to action cinema. But that person got buried under decades of self-mythology and abuse. What's left is a cautionary tale about the dangers of believing your own press.